Ted Cruz stood on this precipice of a moment that would challenge the very foundation of his faith, a moment neither he nor Oprah Winfrey could have foreseen. She had summoned him to her stage armed with the confidence of a media titan ready to frame his beliefs as relics of a bygone era before an audience of millions. The cameras were poised, the studio lights blazing, and Oprah was certain she held the advantage. But Ted Cruz, a man rooted in unyielding conviction, was about to step into her polished empire of spirituality with nothing but the truth in his heart. What he would say would stun the room, a collision of authentic faith and commercialized hope that would ripple far beyond the studio walls. It all began weeks earlier in the quiet of a Texas dawn, when a single phone call pierced the stillness of Ted Cruz's morning. In the modest confines of his home, far removed from the dazzle of media empires, Ted sat at a simple wooden desk, his well-worn Bible open to the Gospel of Matthew. The room around him spoke of a life shaped by conviction rather than comfort. A plain crucifix, a gift from a mentor, hung alone on the wall. A faded photograph of a family moment sat on a shelf, its edges softened by time, and a stack of theology books, their pages dog-eared from years of study, leaned precariously against a chair. His morning routine was a sacred rhythm prayer reflection, and a quiet plea for wisdom to navigate a world that often clashed with his beliefs. The phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the calm. On the other end was Oprah Winfrey's head producer, her voice smooth and professional, extending an invitation for Ted to appear on a spiritual enlightenment special. The show would feature a range of faith leaders and spiritual influencers. She explained, a chance for Ted to share his perspective. Ted paused, his instincts on high alert. He was familiar with Oprah's forays into spirituality, the expensive courses, the ancient wisdom repackaged as revolutionary insights, the sacred traditions turned into profitable products. Her Miracle Mindset Masterclass, priced at thousands of dollars per person, promises to unlock divine abundance through visualization and positive thinking. Her partnerships with New Age teachers had built a financial empire, one that fed on people's hunger for meaning but offered polished substitutes instead of enduring hope. Ted's first thought was to decline. Why enter a space so misaligned with his faith? Yet as he prayed over the decision, a quiet conviction stirred within him. This wasn't just an invitation, it was a divine summons, an opportunity to shine a light in a place clouded by spiritual commerce. Ted understood the stakes. Oprah's platform was a colossus, her audience fiercely loyal, her influence unparalleled. To challenge her worldview on her own turf was to risk public scorn, perhaps even professional ruin. But he also knew the stories of those who had walked this path before, prophets, who spoke truth in hostile courts, disciples who faced ridicule for their unwavering faith. His desk was scattered with letters from everyday people, constituents who had written to thank him for standing firm in his beliefs, for speaking of a hope that didn't demand a paycheck. One letter from a single mother in San Antonio described how she had found peace in Christ after years of chasing empty promises from self-help seminars. Another, from a retired teacher in Austin, shared how a simple church service had restored her sense of purpose, not a costly retreat. These were the voices Ted carried in his heart as he weighed the invitation. They were the reason he couldn't turn away. He had never sought fame or fortune. His choices reflected that. He had declined lucrative deals that would have turned his public role into a brand, opting instead for a life of modesty, guided by a faith that called for sacrifice over self-promotion. But this moment felt different, like a divine appointment he was meant to keep. As Ted prepared for the show, he immersed himself in research not to sharpen his arguments, but to understand the world he was stepping into. Oprah's empire was vast. Millions followed her spiritual guidance, drawn to her charisma and the allure of transformation. Her courses, books, and partnerships generated hundreds of millions built on the premise that spirituality could be purchased, controlled, and mastered. Ted's heart ached for those who invested thousands in these promises, searching for what Christ offered freely: grace, hope, and purpose. The contrast was stark. His faith, grounded in the unchanging truth of Scripture, stood in opposition to a system that commodified sacred mysteries. The night before the taping, Ted knelt in his study, the worn carpet beneath him a familiar comfort. He prayed for courage, for wisdom, for the grace to speak truth with love. He thought of Jesus in the temple overturning the tables of those who profited off faith. He thought of the woman at the well offered living water without cost. He thought of the countless souls who had found true hope not in expensive programs, but in a genuine relationship with God. Ted made peace with the possibility that this appearance could cost him dearly, politically, socially, perhaps even personally. Some truths, he knew, were worth any price. The morning of the taping, Ted arrived at Harpo Studios in Chicago, stepping into a world of opulence that felt like another universe. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and walls were adorned with photographs of Oprah alongside celebrities and world leaders. The green room buzzed with other guests, spiritual influencers, each clutching their latest book or promoting their newest course. They networked with practiced ease, discussing seven-figure book deals and marketing strategies with an enthusiasm that made Ted's stomach churn. He sat quietly in a corner, his Bible open to Psalm 23. The words, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want," anchored him amidst the clamor. A production assistant approached, clipboard in hand, offering a list of suggested talking points. "Make sure you plug your platform," she said with a bright smile. "Oprah's audience loves spiritual content. It's a huge market." Ted smiled politely and declined the script. "I'm not here to sell anything," he said, his voice calm but resolute. The assistant blinked, visibly confused, as if the idea of someone not capitalizing on their moment in the spotlight was incomprehensible. Ted's refusal set him apart in a room filled with spiritual entrepreneurs, each eager to turn their faith into profit. As he waited for his turn, Ted watched from the wings as Oprah interviewed the other guests. Each segment was a master class in marketing, a guru promising instant enlightenment through a $2,000 retreat, a wellness coach pitching a book on unlocking divine energy, a motivational speaker teasing an upcoming app subscription. Oprah guided each conversation with precision, steering it toward products her audience could purchase. The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause, hungry for hope. But Ted saw the emptiness beneath the polish. These were people searching for meaning, offered expensive solutions that couldn't satisfy their deepest longings. He felt the weight of the moment pressing on him, knowing his message would stand in stark contrast to everything unfolding on that stage. His faith wasn't a product to pitch or a brand to build, it was a truth to share, a gift given freely through Christ. The tension in his chest grew not from fear, but from the certainty that he was about to step into a battle not of flesh and blood, but of ideas and eternities. Cities. Ted's preparation wasn't about crafting clever sound bites or rehearsing polished responses. It was about grounding himself in the truth he had lived for years. He thought of the countless conversations he'd had with people across Texas, farmers, teachers, small business owners who shared how their faith had carried them through loss, hardship, and doubt. A mechanic in Lubbock who found forgiveness after years of bitterness. A nurse in El Paso who clung to prayer during long hospital shifts. These were the voices that echoed in his mind as he readied himself for the stage. He wasn't there to win an argument or gain followers. He was there to point people to the one who had changed his life and countless others. The production team bustled around him, adjusting lights and checking microphones, oblivious to the spiritual stakes at play. Ted closed his Bible, tucking it into his jacket pocket, and whispered a final prayer. "Lord, let my words honor you. Let them reach those who need you." He didn't know exactly what he would face on that stage, but he knew who stood with him. The green room was a microcosm of the spiritual marketplace Oprah had built. Guests swapped stories of sold-out seminars and viral social media campaigns, their voices brimming with ambition. Ted listened quietly, his heart heavy with the contrast between their pursuits and the simplicity of the gospel. He thought of the parable of the sower scattering seeds on different soils and prayed that his words would find fertile ground even in a place as unlikely as this. The production assistant called his name, signaling it was time. Ted stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the stage, carrying nothing but his Bible and a heart full of faith. The lights were blinding the audience, expectant, and Oprah waited with her trademark smile, its warmth tinged with calculation. Ted felt a calm resolve settle over him. He wasn't stepping into her studio to play her game or bow to her influence. He was there to speak for those who couldn't. People misled by promises of spiritual shortcuts. People yearning for a hope that didn't come with a price tag. The contrast between his world and Oprah's was undeniable. Hers was built on charisma and commerce, his on conviction and surrender. As he took his first step onto the stage, Ted knew this was no ordinary interview. It was a moment that could change everything, not just for him, but for everyone watching. Ted Cruz stepped onto the stage of Harpo Studios, his heart steady, but his senses alive with the weight of the moment. Oprah Winfrey, media titan, sat poised across from him, her smile warm, yet calculated, ready to weave his faith into her narrative of universal spirituality before millions of viewers. The cameras rolled, capturing every glance, every gesture, as the audience leaned forward, sensing an unspoken tension. Oprah believed she could steer this conversation, framing Ted's beliefs as narrow in her carefully curated world of enlightenment. But Ted, anchored in unwavering conviction, carried a truth that would not bend. What unfolded would shake the studio, a collision of authentic faith and polished commerce that left the audience stunned. The stage was set for a battle of world views, and it began the moment Ted took his seat, his Bible resting quietly in his pocket, a silent testament to the truth he was there to share. The studio was a spectacle of opulence, its marble floors gleaming under soft lights, the air buzzing with the energy of a live broadcast. The audience, a sea of expectant faces, clapped politely as Ted walked out. But their eyes held curiosity, as if they sensed something different about this guest. Oprah opened with her signature charm, her voice smooth and inviting, designed to put guests at ease while setting the tone. "Ted, you've inspired so many with your public service and your outspoken faith." She began, her words dripping with practiced warmth. "Tell us about the spiritual practices that guide you, that elevate your consciousness to this level of influence." The question was a trap cloaked in flattery, meant to pull Ted into her framework of vague, inclusive spirituality. He recognized the tactic immediately, her attempt to dilute his faith into a feel-good philosophy, one of many paths to the divine. The audience leaned in, expecting a predictable response, perhaps a nod to meditation or mindfulness, but Ted paused, his silence deliberate, his eyes meeting Oprah's with a calm resolve. "Oprah, I appreciate the question," he said, his voice steady but kind, "but I don't follow spiritual practices or chase consciousness levels. My life is grounded in a relationship with Jesus Christ, who said, 'I am the way, the truth, and the life. The words landed like a stone in still water rippling through the studio. The audience shifted in their seats, a murmur of surprise passing through them. Oprah's smile tightened, a flicker of unease crossing her face, barely noticeable but caught by the cameras. This wasn't the inclusive spirituality her show thrived on. Ted continued, his tone gentle yet firm. Everything I am flows from knowing Him, not from techniques I've mastered or levels I've achieved. The air grew heavy, the studio suddenly a battleground of ideas. Oprah recovered quickly, her media training kicking in as she pivoted to safer ground. "That's beautiful, Ted," she said, her voice regaining its warmth. "And of course, there are many paths to that divine connection, many ways to tap into that universal love and wisdom you call Jesus." Her words were carefully crafted, designed to make Ted's faith sound like just another option in her spiritual marketplace, a product among products. But Ted had spent years studying scripture, engaging in debates, and facing critics. He saw through her attempt to dilute the gospel into something palatable for her audience. "Actually, Oprah, I have to respectfully disagree," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "Jesus didn't say He was one path among many. He said, 'No one comes to the Father except through me.' That's not a preference, it's a truth." The audience fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Oprah's eyes narrowed slightly, her composure tested. She had built an empire on the idea that all spiritual roads led to the same destination, and Ted had just challenged the foundation of that empire. The tension was palpable, the cameras capturing every micro-expression as the audience sensed a shift. This was no longer a light-hearted talk show segment, it was a theological showdown with stakes far beyond the studio. Oprah leaned forward, her tone still controlled, but with an edge. "Ted, surely you don't mean to suggest that billions of good spiritual people around the world are wrong about their beliefs?" The question was a calculated strike, designed to paint Ted as judgmental, to make his faith seem exclusive and outdated. The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Ted recognized the trap, but also saw the opportunity. He leaned forward slightly, his voice filled with compassion, not confrontation. "Oprah, I'd never call anyone a bad person for what they believe," he said. "But truth isn't decided by sincerity or good intentions, it's decided by reality." He paused, letting the words settle, then offered a simple analogy. "If my house is burning, and someone sincerely believes water won't put it out, their sincerity doesn't change the fact that water is what I need to save it." The analogy was clear, relatable, and powerful, cutting through the haze of relativism. Some audience members nodded, their faces softening as they grasped the point. Oprah's smile faltered, her frustration growing as Ted refused to play by her rules. She had expected a politician eager to please, not a man prepared to stand his ground with such clarity. The exchange intensified as Oprah pressed harder, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. "Ted, don't you think it's a bit arrogant to claim your faith is the only true one? What about the wisdom traditions that have guided people for centuries?" The question was meant to corner him, to make him seem narrow-minded in front of her progressive audience. The murmurs grew louder, the audience now fully engaged, some leaning forward, others whispering to their neighbors. Ted felt the weight of their expectations, but also the strength of his conviction. He had faced tougher critics in Senate hearings, but this was different. This was about eternity, not policy. "Oprah, I'm not claiming my faith is true, because it's mine," he said, his voice steady and earnest. "I'm saying Jesus Christ is true, because He proved it through His life, his death, and his resurrection. The audience was silent now, hanging on his words. Ted continued, his passion rising, but his tone still measured. Religion can become just another product, something to make people feel good without changing their hearts. But Jesus didn't come to sell a lifestyle. He came to save souls, to offer forgiveness and hope, freely given, not bought. The words struck like a hammer, exposing the chasm between Ted's faith and the commercial spirituality Oprah championed. Her face tightened, the cameras catching the moment her composure began to crack. Oprah shifted tactics, her voice sharper now, betraying a hint of irritation. "Ted, let's be real here. You're a public figure, a senator with influence and resources. Isn't it a little hypocritical to criticize others for monetizing spirituality when your career thrives on public attention?" The attack was personal, designed to undermine his credibility, to paint him as a politician profiting from his platform. The audience perked up, sensing a shift, their eyes darting between Oprah and Ted. But Ted was ready. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook, its pages worn from use. "Oprah." "That's a fair question," he said calmly, holding up the notebook. "This is my schedule from last month. I spent most of it meeting with people, families, workers, veterans, who don't care about my title but need someone to listen. I don't take a dime for sharing my faith." The audience gasped softly, caught off guard by his transparency. Ted continued, "I live simply because that's what my faith calls for, not to build an empire, but to serve others." The revelation hit the room like a wave. The contrast stark between his modest life and the opulence of the studio. Oprah's face paled slightly, her research team having missed this side of Ted's life. She had expected a politician's polish, not this raw authenticity. Ted pressed forward, his voice growing more urgent, but still laced with compassion. "Oprah, when Jesus called his disciples, he told them to take nothing for the journey, no money, no extra clothes, just trust in God. That's not a call to poverty for everyone, but it's a call to put our treasure in heaven, not in earthly gain." The words landed heavily, a direct challenge to the empire Oprah had built on spiritual commerce. The audience was riveted, some nodding, others wiping tears, as Ted's sincerity cut through the polished veneer of the show. Oprah's composure was fraying now, her voice rising slightly. "That's easy to say when you're basking in the spotlight of public life," she shot back, her tone sharp. "Don't lecture me about humility when your career depends on being seen." The outburst was rare for Oprah, the queen of media control, and the audience fell silent, sensing the stakes. Ted remained calm, his eyes steady, as if he had anticipated this moment. "Oprah." "I'm not here for the spotlight," he said softly. "I'm here because people are searching for hope, and they're being sold expensive substitutes instead of the truth that sets them free." The parallel was devastating, and Oprah's eyes flickered with recognition. She had built her empire on people's spiritual hunger, but Ted was pointing them to something deeper, something real. The studio was a crucible now, the tension thick enough to choke on. Oprah's audience, so used to her guiding the narrative, watched as Ted held his ground, not with arrogance, but with a quiet strength that disarmed them. He wasn't performing, he was testifying. The cameras zoomed in, catching the sweat on Oprah's brow, the intensity in Ted's eyes, the hushed awe of the audience. Ted's words carried a weight that transcended the stage, speaking to the millions watching at home, many of whom had spent years chasing the promises of Oprah's courses. "You don't need to buy truth." Ted said, his voice gentle but resolute. "You don't need to earn love. Jesus offers it all freely to anyone who comes to him with an open heart." The simplicity of the message stood in stark contrast to the complexity of Oprah's empire, and the audience felt it. Some clapped softly, others sat in stunned silence, as if hearing the gospel for the first time in a way that cut through the noise of their lives. Oprah, sensing the shift in the room, tried to regain control. "Ted, you're speaking from your truth, and I respect that," she said, her voice smoother now, attempting to reframe the conversation. "But spirituality is about finding what resonates with each person, not imposing one belief on everyone." It was a classic move, an attempt to neutralize Ted's exclusivity by wrapping it in inclusivity. But Ted wasn't swayed. "Oprah, I'm not imposing anything," he replied, his tone still kind but unyielding. "I'm sharing what Jesus himself said." He didn't offer a menu of options. He offered himself as the only way to God. "That's not my opinion. It's his claim." The audience was fully engaged now, some whispering, others nodding, as Ted's words resonated with a clarity they hadn't expected. Oprah's smile was gone, replaced by a look of determination. She wasn't used to losing control of her own show, and she wasn't about to let Ted have the last word. The stage was set for a confrontation that would push both of them to the edge, a moment that would define not just the interview but the lives of everyone watching. Ted Cruz stood resolute on the stage of Harpo Studios, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshaken as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. Oprah Winfrey, her polished facade cracking, leaned forward, her eyes sharp with the intent to reclaim her narrative before millions of viewers. The cameras captured every tense glance, every fleeting pause, as the audience sat frozen, sensing the confrontation had reached its peak. Oprah was certain she could unravel Ted's faith, painting it as rigid and exclusionary in her world of universal spirituality. But Ted, anchored in a truth deeper than the studio's bright lights, was about to deliver a response that would silence the room and challenge the core of her empire. What unfolded would become a pivotal moment, a clash of steadfast faith against commercialized hope that left Oprah speechless and the audience transformed. It began when Oprah, sensing her control slipping, launched her most piercing attack, unaware that Ted's next words would shift the entire trajectory of the interview. The studio, with its gleaming marble floors and sparkling chandeliers, felt like a pressure cooker, the opulence a stark contrast to the raw intensity of the exchange. The audience, no longer passive, sat on the edge of their seats, their earlier cheers replaced by a heavy silence. Oprah, her voice laced with frustration, went for a decisive blow. "Ted, let's get real," she said, her tone sharp and deliberate. "You're a senator, thriving on influence and attention. Isn't it hypocritical to criticize others for monetizing spirituality when your career depends on public acclaim?" The accusation was a calculated strike meant to expose Ted as a fraud, to undermine his credibility before her devoted audience. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others shifting uneasily, sensing the personal edge of the attack. The cameras zoomed in, catching the intensity in Oprah's eyes and the calm determination on Ted's face. He didn't waver. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook, its edges frayed from use. "Oprah, that's a fair question," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "This is my schedule from the past month. Meetings with families, workers, and veterans who don't care about my title but need someone to listen. I don't take a dime for sharing my faith." The audience let out a soft gasp, caught off guard by his transparency. Ted continued, "I live simply because my faith calls me to serve, not to chase wealth or fame." The words hit like a quiet thunderbolt, the contrast between his modesty and the studio's extravagance undeniable. Oprah's face paled slightly, her team having missed this side of Ted's life. She had expected a politician's deflection, not this unyielding authenticity. The room grew still, the weight of Ted's words settling over the audience. Oprah, sensing the shift, pressed harder, her voice rising with a mix of irritation and urgency. "Ted, you're dismissing the value of other spiritual paths," she said, her tone cutting. "You're saying billions of people are wrong, and that's dangerous." The accusation was designed to corner him, to make his faith seem divisive. The audience stirred, some nodding in agreement, others visibly torn as the cameras captured their divided reactions. Ted leaned forward, his eyes filled with compassion, not conflict. "Oprah, I'm not dismissing anyone's sincerity," he said gently, "but truth isn't shaped by good intentions, it's shaped by reality. If I'm stranded in a storm and someone sincerely offers me a map that leads nowhere, their kindness doesn't get me home." The analogy was clear and powerful, slicing through the haze of relativism. Audience members nodded, some wiping tears, as Ted's clarity struck a chord. Oprah's smile faded, her frustration evident. She wasn't used to losing control of her stage, and Ted's refusal to conform was dismantling her narrative. Then came the moment that would redefine everything. Ted's voice softened, his eyes locking with Oprah's as he shared a story that would shift the room's energy. "Oprah, a few days ago I spoke with a mother from Dallas." He began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Her name is Maria, and her 7-year-old son Noah is fighting cancer. Noah watches your show from his hospital bed, finding comfort in the hope you offer. But he asked his mom a question that broke my heart. Does the lady on TV really know Jesus, or is she just pretending?" The studio fell silent, the weight of a child's innocent question cutting through the air like a blade. The cameras caught Oprah's face, her eyes widening, her breath catching as the words landed. The audience was transfixed, some visibly moved, tears glistening in their eyes. Ted continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I told Maria that only God knows someone's heart. But I asked her to pray for those who speak about faith, because it's a heavy responsibility." The story's simplicity was devastating, exposing the gap between authentic faith and the polished spirituality Pai had built her empire on. Noah's question, pure and unfiltered, revealed a truth that even Oprah couldn't deflect. Oprah's hands shook slightly, her usual poise crumbling. That's emotional manipulation," she stammered, her voice weak. The audience stirred, some shaking their heads, others crying openly as they recognized the authenticity in Ted's words. For the first time, they saw Oprah not as an untouchable icon, but as a woman facing her own contradictions. Ted shook his head gently, his voice filled with compassion. "No, Oprah. It's not manipulation," he said. "It's a child seeing what adults often miss because his heart isn't clouded by pride or ambition. Noah knows the difference between someone who loves Jesus and someone who uses his name for profit." The words were a precise strike, laying bare the heart of Oprah's empire, a system that fed on spiritual hunger but offered costly substitutes instead of true hope. The audience was silent, the cameras capturing every tear, every furrowed brow. Even the crew, seasoned by years of production, seemed affected, their movements slowing as they watched the moment unfold. Oprah, her composure nearly shattered, tried to rally. "Ted, you're making this personal," she said, her voice strained. "I've helped millions find hope, find meaning. You can't dismiss that." The plea was raw, a glimpse of vulnerability beneath her polished exterior. Ted looked at her, his eyes soft but resolute. "Oprah, I don't doubt you've helped people," he said. "Kindness is valuable. But helping people feel better isn't the same as leading them to the one who transforms them. Jesus didn't come to make us comfortable. He came to make us new." The words hit like a wave, challenging the foundation of Oprah's spiritual empire. The audience, many of whom had invested heavily in her courses, felt the truth resonate. Some nodded. Others clutched their hands, grappling with years of chasing empty promises. Oprah sat rigid, her face a mix of anger and fear, as the realization dawned that she might have been wrong. The tension was palpable, the studio a sacred space, where pretense was peeling away. Ted's voice grew softer, more urgent. Oprah, you've built something impressive, but it's built on giving people what they want, not what they need. Jesus offers forgiveness and love freely to anyone who comes to him. No courses, no fees, no elite access. The contrast was stark, and the audience felt it deeply. Tears streamed down faces as Ted's words pierced hearts. Oprah's empire, with its costly seminars and glossy promises, seemed hollow in comparison. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time, Oprah Winfrey was speechless, her carefully crafted facade cracking before millions. The cameras captured the raw vulnerability in her eyes, the slight tremble of her hands. The audience, so used to her commanding presence, saw a woman confronted with a truth she couldn't evade. Ted spoke with gentleness, not triumph. "Oprah, I'm not here to judge you," he said. "I'm here for people like Noah who need hope that doesn't cost them everything. They deserve to know that Jesus loves them right where they are." The audience was captivated, some whispering prayers, others wiping tears, as Ted's words offered a clarity they hadn't found in years of spiritual searching. Oprah's face crumpled, the weight of Noah's question and Ted's compassion breaking through. I don't know how to answer that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The admission was monumental, a fracture in the armor of a woman who had built her life on having all the answers. The studio was silent, the moment raw and unscripted, as the audience witnessed a turning point that would echo far beyond the stage. Ted Cruz stepped off the stage of Harpo Studios, his heart still reverberating from the seismic encounter that had unfolded, a moment that had shaken Oprah Winfrey's empire and touched millions. Oprah, her polished exterior shattered, sat in stunned silence as the cameras lingered, capturing the raw vulnerability in her eyes. The audience, no longer mere spectators, sat in awe, their tears and hushed whispers testifying to the power of what they had witnessed. Oprah had sought to challenge Ted's faith, to frame it as narrow in her world of universal spirituality. But his unwavering truth had turned the tables, exposing the fragility of her commercialized hope. What followed would become a testament to the transformative power of authentic faith. A moment that redefined not just Oprah's path, but the lives of countless others. It began as the studio lights dimmed, and Oprah for the first time faced the question that would change her forever. What happens now? The studio, with its gleaming marble and dazzling chandeliers, felt strangely quiet. The opulence overshadowed by the weight of truth that hung in the air. The audience, many still wiping tears, watched as Oprah rose from her chair, her usual confidence replaced by a trembling uncertainty. Ted, his Bible still tucked in his pocket, looked at her with compassion, not triumph. "Oprah," he said softly, his voice steady but warm. "The beautiful thing about Jesus is that he meets you right where you are. You don't need to have all the answers, just an open heart." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of grace, offering a lifeline to a woman who had spent decades building an empire on self-reliance. Oprah's eyes, red from tears, met his, and for a moment, the cameras captured something rare, the media titan, vulnerable and searching, standing at a crossroads. The audience held their breath, sensing the sacredness of the moment. Ted continued, his tone gentle. "The same Jesus who loves Noah, that little boy, fighting cancer, loves you too. He's not asking for perfection. He's asking for you." The studio was silent, the hum of the cameras faint against the profound stillness. Audience members clutched hands, some whispering prayers, as they witnessed a transformation unfolding in real time. Oprah's voice, barely above a whisper, broke the silence. "What if I've been wrong all this time?" she asked, her words raw and unguarded. The question was a confession, a crack in the foundation of an empire built on selling spiritual solutions. Ted knelt beside her, his presence steady and kind. "Then you're exactly where you need to be," he said. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." That's you, right now, Oprah, ready to let go and let him lead. The audience watched transfixed as Oprah nodded, tears streaming down her face. The moment was unscripted, raw, and sacred, a surrender that millions would replay and share across the world. Ted prayed quietly with her, his words simple and heartfelt. "Jesus, here is your daughter Oprah. She's tired of carrying the weight alone. Show her your love, your grace, your truth." The prayer was not a performance, but a genuine plea, and the audience felt it, many joining in silent prayer, their hearts stirred by the authenticity of the moment. In the weeks that followed, Oprah made a decision that stunned the world. She announced the end of her spiritual empowerment courses, dismantling the commercial empire that had defined her for decades. "I've been selling people what they wanted to hear," she said in a quiet video message, "when I should have been pointing them to the one who offers what they need." The financial cost was immense. Millions in revenue vanished overnight. But Oprah found a peace she hadn't known in years, a peace rooted in aligning her life with truth rather than profit. She began visiting children's hospitals, not with cameras or fanfare, but with a quiet humility, sitting with families like Noah's, reading stories, and praying with them. One small news story overlooked by most told of her time with Noah, who smiled and said, "Miss Oprah found Jesus just like me." The ripple effects of that day in the studio spread far, touching lives in ways no seminar could. Ted continued his work, his faith unchanged, but his impact deepened as people across the nation wrote to thank him for standing firm, for showing them a hope that didn't come with a price tag. The lesson was clear. Authentic faith rooted in truth and humility has the power to transform even the most unyielding hearts. Ted's stand wasn't about winning an argument, but about pointing people to a love that costs nothing, yet gives everything. For the audience, both in the studio and at home, the moment was a call to examine their own lives, to ask what they were chasing and whether it was worth the cost. The story taught that true success isn't found in wealth or fame, but in surrendering to a purpose greater than oneself. It encouraged listeners to embrace humility, to seek forgiveness, and to act with compassion, just as Ted had done. The video of the interview, viewed millions of times, became a beacon for those hungry for truth in an age of spiritual confusion. Comments poured in from viewers worldwide, one writing, "If Oprah can admit she needs a savior, maybe I can too." The story of that day continues to inspire a reminder that no one is too powerful or too lost to find grace, and that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with a single honest question.